In this video, we'll be looking at behaviorism as a learning theory. Behaviorism originated in psychology and was an attempt to investigate the origins of the behaviors we exhibit, but also how to control these behaviors. Perhaps the most famous behaviorist experiment was done by Ivan Pavlov. As you know, he experimented on dogs, and when they were given food, you could observe that they secreted saliva. What Pavlov did was that he always rang a bell before feeding them. After a while, it was found that the very sound of the bell meant that the dogs started secreting saliva, even though they had not yet been fed. He was later able to show the same results when studying children. Pavlov's experiment was an expression of what we call classical conditioning, where a behavior came about due to an external influence. This is often contrasted with operant or instrumental conditioning, where you either try to reinforce a certain behavior, so-called positive reinforcement, or challenge a certain behavior, so-called negative reinforcement. The researcher most associated with instrumental conditioning is B.F. Skinner. He demonstrated that behavior does not have to be reinforced or rewarded every time it occurs. A rat that was constantly rewarded for a certain behavior would eventually stop performing that behavior as soon as you stop rewarding it. But if you rewarded a rat more sporadically, the behavior would last longer. In Skinner's most famous experiment, he made pigeons dance, so to speak. By giving a hungry pigeon some food every time it moved to the right, for example, he could see that after just a few minutes, the pigeon started moving in a certain direction. This behavior chain was also reinforced in a way that continued even when he didn't feed the pigeons. So, if his insights were to be implemented on teaching and learning, we can easily imagine a learning situation where the students is constantly being complimented by the teacher when achieving something. That student might then be encouraged to continue striving towards doing similar achievements in the hope of receiving further compliments from the teacher. However, if the teacher, irrespective of the student's achievements, stop complimenting the student, it is also reasonable to think that the student might stop excelling in their studies. But also, according to Skinner's insight, a teacher should not give compliments all the time. Instead, compliments or other forms of positive reinforcements should be given out sporadically in order to achieve longer lasting effects on desired student behavior. So, by using positive reinforcement, the teacher can induce certain desirable behaviors among students. Teachers can accordingly make students dance like pigeons, so to speak. At the same time, behaviorist learning theory suggests that negative behavior can impede, negative reinforcement can impede good behavior among students. One of the insights Skinner made was that negative reinforcement is not as effective as positive reinforcement for learning. Accordingly, he emphasized that learning strategies that involve punishing students will not be successful. Instead, you should incorporate encouragement in your teaching and the promise of a reward that comes from doing the right thing. It is quite easy to see why this theory has influenced the way we think about learning. Few people today would argue that negative reinforcement contributes to learning as much as positive reinforcement. With this insight, teachers can then begin to critically examine their own behavior to see if they are impeding learning through negative reinforcements. You can also build learning strategies that reward the kind of behavior that you want to see in your students. In addition to classical and instrumental behaviorism, there is a third perspective highlighted in behaviorist learning theory, social learning theory. This development of behaviorism is often associated with the work of Albert Bandura. Bandura emphasized that learning is not only affected by such external stimuli that the teacher provides to the student. Instead, learning also occurs through modeling, meaning by observing how others act. In contrast to classic and operant conditioning, then, students are not passive recipients who simply react to the environment. Instead, they are actively observing their environment and learning certain behaviors through imitating or modeling them, their teacher or their peers. Accordingly, Social learning theory recognizes that the student has the ability to choose their behaviors to adapt, thus challenging the assumptions that they are just reacting to external stimuli. A strength in behaviorism as a learning theory is that it emphasizes that learning is not only about thinking in a certain way, as if learning were entirely a cognitive activity. The theory shows that learning is also about the environment and the external influences on the student, which is important for understanding how to enable learning for the student. Thus, if it is not enough to have a certain material of knowledge that you want to teach, you must also create the conditions for the student that benefit learning. And perhaps somewhat uncomfortable, a somewhat uncomfortable idea is also that you as a teacher must model the kind of behavior that you want to see in your students. The theory has been criticized, however. For example, it too easily thinks that there is something deterministic about behavior, as if a certain positive or negative reinforcement will guarantee learning. There are no such guarantees. There are only tendencies and statistically probable models to work from. Consequently, something that works for one group of students might not work for another. But it becomes even more problematic if you think, as some behaviorists tend to do, that learning is only about behavior. For instance, cognitive conditions and techniques will also contribute to learning. Related to this, it seems that some forms of learning cannot be reduced to behavior. The linguist Noam Chomsky, among others, has argued that language development is not only rooted in behavior, but is also based on innate capacities that the child has at birth. Behaviorism thus represents an important but not a universal theory of learning, but it is nevertheless a theory that has and continues to have an impact on how we understand learning today. If we summarize then behaviorism, it can explain learning in three ways. The first is through classic conditioning, where you react reflexively to a stimuli. This was Pavlov's insight. The second is then operant or instrumental conditioning, where a stimulus is reached through the use of reward, where a behavior is reached through the use of reward or punishment. And this was then Skinner's insight. And the third emerges in what we call social learning theory, where modeling becomes an important element in shaping behavior. This was Bandura. So that was behaviorism as a learning theory. Hope this video lecture was helpful. Take care.